Welcome, everybody, to our first in a series of Friday Lives on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube, depending on where you happen to be. We're glad that you're here. Say hello if you're here. We hope that you'll do that. I'm going to introduce this guy that's with me here in just a second. But I think you probably know me, that I'm Kevin Eikenberry, and one way or another, you probably know that. And with me is my colleague, co-worker, co-author, and friend, Wayne Turmel. We've written a couple of books together. Do you have a copy in front of you, Wayne?
I actually do have. Look.
There you go. The long distance leader, the long distance teammate. We've been at this a while. I've been leading a hybrid team for over a decade. If you are new to us, but we're glad you're here. I've done lots of lives on all these platforms and using StreamYard, which we're using today. But there is something new for us today, and that is including a LinkedIn event. Now, there's some other reasons. Starting next week, these LinkedIn events will also be available on LinkedIn Learning, which is pretty exciting for us. But it does mean that I might be turning my head occasionally to look at another screen, which has another set of chats happening. So if you're on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, if you're on my LinkedIn channel, I can see your comments right here on the screen that I'm on, and you should say hello. Tell us where you are. Say hello to us. Get ready to talk because we want your input in a second. But if you see me doing this, hello, April, then you'll know that Wayne knows April as well.
Hi, April.
And that I'll be looking over there because I don't think those chats show up in this format. So that's a little inside baseball that you just will not think that Kevin is multitasking, because I'm really not, I promise. We said we'd come here today to talk about the challenges, to talk about the worries, to talk about the issues that people are facing today, right now. And so that's what we're going to do. We got lots of stuff going on. Hello, Luciano from California. So I know we got people from Texas. We got people from California here. Lots of stuff happening. Someone is chatting as me. That if you're on YouTube or Facebook, that's not me doing it. Someone's doing it, which is awesome. And I am not literally in two places at once. But we're excited to have you here. We're just going to talk about sort of what's happening now, what we're hearing with our customers, what we're hearing in the marketplace. And we really want to know what your concerns are, what your issues are. You know, I said something about April being here. Works for one of our clients. And we've been doing sessions for them for several months. And I'm actually doing a session for them, Wayne, later this afternoon. I think you know that. And I'm doing a presentation that I've done for them before. And as I was reviewing it this morning, I'm thinking, well, you know, the world continues to change. It's been probably 3 months since I did this particular session for them. And I'm making some small adjustments because the world keeps changing. So I guess we'll just start there. As we look at this in the middle of August, Wayne, what are you hearing from folks in terms of their biggest concerns or challenges about all this future of work, hybrid work stuff? What are the biggest worries you're hearing right now from employees?
Yeah, it's funny. You and I have been kind of eyes to the horizon, kind of keeping an eye on what's going to happen. Actually, one of our own employees, one of our teammates this morning sent me a note and said, hey, have you talked about this? And we haven't, and we ought to. So what her concern, Angie's concern, was, what about those people who have been told, hey, we're going back to the office, we're going back to the office. They're dealing with that. I don't want to go, or I really want to go. We're going back after Labor Day. Oh, no, now we're putting it off another 2 months.
Right?
Now we're putting it off another 2 months. And just the sheer whiplash of what's going on, and people have been hanging by their fingernails for 18 months, and their brains are going enough already. You know, and just sheer exhaustion. I think that's where we are in a lot of situations. It's just people are just tired, and they're running on adrenaline and goodwill and fear, depending on how confident they are in their job. And that's unsustainable.
Well, you know, it's so interesting because we were having that last part of this conversation all last summer. right? Remember when we started, we had a client, and I really remember this very, very vividly. In late March, they said, we're going to send everyone home for 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yeah, this was all going to be over by Memorial Day.
Yeah. And then it was, it'll be Memorial Day. Well, the 4th of July. This was 2020, everybody, right? Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day. Well, Halloween. Well, first of the year. And so we dealt with all of this exhaustion and all of this uncertainty then as the tunnel kept getting longer. And I think you're right. Then people were seeing the end of the tunnel. We're going back in Labor Day. And obviously there are people here that are already back. We understand that, of course. But I think Angie's point in calling it whiplash is exactly right. You know, people, some want to come back, some don't. But whatever it was, they were figuring out what they needed to do with their kids and remembering how to drive to that office that they haven't driven to, making sure they have clothes they can wear and all of those things. And now the brakes have been put on again. So
it's interesting. If you look in the chat, Luciano said something really interesting, which is we talk about it as a leadership problem, or we talk about it as this or that. The truth of the matter is it's a change management thing and how people cope and deal with change. And you can give them all the tactical help, learning, you can write better emails, you can lead better meetings, you can do all that stuff. But the environment in which people are working, if you don't address that, if you don't address the ambiguity and the uncertainty, people don't deal well with uncertainty over long periods of time.
Newsflash, everybody. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I've been saying this thing about it being change management for quite a while now, right? And it really is a change management issue. We have one client where that was a big part of our conversation in June and July. As you're getting ready to go back, right? Our conversation was, this isn't just about changing a policy. This is about changing the future of your workplace and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is a change management challenge. And now your point, Luciano's point, is now that that's still what it is. Even if you had a plan, even if you were already back and now you're sending people home again, or even if you're just pumping the brakes on again, it's still dealing with that uncertainty, dealing with those unknowns, and helping people deal with that. Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, Rebecca said something in the chat, which I think is so important right now, which is the uncertainty means that people may be giving information that is true to the best of their knowledge and then turns out not to be, right? And if we don't package that information correctly, it can be seen as breaking faith or not being trustworthy or whatever. I never in a million years thought I would find myself quoting Donald Rumsfeld. But, when he said, there are things we know, there are things we don't know, there are things we know we don't know, and there are unknown unknowns. And if you don't have that in mind, with the notion that what I'm telling you right now is what we know right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of leaders are putting on a brave face and saying, no, this is how it's going to work. And it ain't.
I've told leaders for years when I teach and have conversations with people about leading change, Wayne, is that, one of the mistakes that leaders make is they don't share information until they have it all, in part because they're trying to deal with that very thing. Like, I don't want to tell people something that it not be wrong. I don't want so they wait with the good intention of waiting until I have full information. But while they're waiting, people are making it up, right? That's where gossip comes from, in part, right? Like a mushroom, grows in the dark. But this is exacerbating it.
Yes.
Right. And so not only do we need to put it in the context that you're talking about and let people know, hey, I'm telling you what I know when I know it, and it may change. It's changing in the world. It's going to change here. We can do all that, and we can, I think, actually maintain and build trust through that, even if it changes, because they know you're telling them what you know. And so I'm just saying, make sure you don't, your better judgment might say to wait, but you just got to let them know what you know when you know it. And Rebecca said something else that's really important. The last part. It's hard managing everyone's fear and emotions, including my own. And you know what? If you're feeling it, you're human and it's okay, right? And in fact, you might be better off for yourself. I'm not a psychologist, right? But you might be better off for yourself and with your team if you're just vulnerable and say, hey, this is hard for me too. You're not whining. You're just sharing, right?
Well, I think it's interesting. Employees make assumptions about their leaders based on the fact that they're the leaders. And there are two of them that they make, which puts a lot of pressure on leaders because we need to be aware that this exists, right? The first is they assume we know more than we do. Right? They just assume that we have the knowledge of the universe and we decide to share or not share with them. Yeah. The second thing is that they assume we are handling this better than they are.
Well,
and I guess the third thing is they assume that we have way more power and control over the situation than in fact we do.
Yeah, let's just take that second one for a second, right? And that is that one of the reasons they assume that is because too many leaders for too long thought that was the facade they were supposed to put up, right? So Rebecca said again, I just keep telling people what I don't know. At least they know I'm being transparent. And, too many leaders have come into the role thinking I'm supposed to know everything, right? So I'm supposed to be the one that's got it handled. I'm supposed to be the one that's strong. And while strength is influential, so is transparency, right? So is being vulnerable. So is being real. And so I think there are leaders that are afraid that if they say this is hard for me, that everyone else is going to think less of them, when in fact the opposite might be true. Just in the chat, wherever you're at, do you want a boss that puts on a brave face, or do you want a transparent, vulnerable leader? Right? Just put it in the chat and tell us which it is for you. We don't have a poll. We're not going to do that, but you could just tell us, because chances are, if that's how you feel, that's how your team feels. Go ahead, Wayne.
I am an old man, and so I will tell you that I have a visceral reaction to what you just said, right? Which is there's putting on a brave face, spitting in the face of denial, doing all that on the one hand. The vulnerability thing, I think, is important and critical, and I agree with you. And when that skews over into throwing up your hands and absolving yourself of all responsibility and saying, it's not me, it's them, that's a little far on the other side. And
that is not what we're talking about. But you're exactly right, right? So, the answer isn't to move the dial on either end, right? The answer is in the middle. And the reality is that, as leaders, we can't be victims. We can't be allowing our folks to be victims. Someone just said a 50-50 balance, right? And I don't know if it's 50-50 on a given day. Today, it might be leaning more toward the being vulnerable side, right? But directionally, to say it's a balance, 50-50, 60-40, some of that is personal style. There's room for that in there too. A humble servant leader who never claims to know it all. Pretty good place. In our work, in the long distance leader, we talk about the 3-0 model, Wayne. We talk about outcome. Leadership is about outcomes, others, and ourselves. And so this conversation is a lot about the balance between outcomes and others. Is this just about what we need to get done? Or is this about the folks that are doing the work? And we need to strike a similar related balance in terms of we can't be whining either, right? If that makes sense.
I want to go to what the user said about servant leadership, because I am a huge proponent and believer in servant leadership. That said, there is a dark side to servant leadership for many leaders, which is where you reach a point where you're taking all the hits. You're taking everything on for the team. You are always going above and beyond. You are taking calls at 6 a.m. and 10 at night because of time zones. And by the way, working nonstop in between.
Hey,
and that idea that
stop talking about me now.
I'm just saying, hypothetically, some leaders could do that. That idea that we do need to take care of ourselves and be mindful of what it takes for us to be at our best. Constantly sacrificing ourselves is kind of the ideal. We kind of always want to, I wouldn't ask my team to do anything they wouldn't, I wouldn't do. And I remember somebody one time asking me, exactly where is the line on what you wouldn't do? And it stopped me really cold because I realized I was overextending myself. I was not functioning at my best. I was reacting to everything in the name of servant leadership and not being the leader I needed to be as a result.
Let me just say something else about that statement, right? Because I've said it, and I think it's a true statement. We ought to be willing to do whatever it is we're asking them to do. I'll tell you all a story. So some of you might know that I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a pig farm. And if you've never been on a pig farm, I can tell you there are some unsavory tasks. I'll just leave it at that. And I've done them all, right? And I've been asked to do them by my father when he went off to town to do whatever else. But I can remember many times when he'd come back from town and he'd change his clothes and come out and join us. Now, that doesn't mean the difference here is being willing to doesn't mean always doing.
Yes.
And that's, I think, where we get stuck. I don't think we want to change that idea of being willing to. It's like, do we always do it? Or do we do it for them, which is no more than being codependent, right? So we're getting mostly, I haven't shown them all here, but we've got authentic leader. I've got vulnerable, same thing. Vulnerable leader, not afraid to admit they don't have all the answers. So if that's who you want, guess who your folks want? Same thing, right? Same thing. So Rebecca says honesty is, I'm not going to put it up there because it's a nice, really long thing. Honesty is always best. My team opens up when I do. Exactly. Right. People are truly struggling with the isolation at home. So much to say about this topic. Well, here's the thing. People are struggling and they're still struggling. And so what else are they struggling with now, Wayne? We've sort of really just talked about that one thing, which is important. Anything else that you're hearing right now that maybe we ought to riff on, chat about, hear what other people are thinking about for a minute?
Yeah, I think as we go back, return to office, RTO, we're not consultants if we don't throw enough acronyms and jargon around. But as people return to the office, they're trying to figure out the right blend of how much do I be in person, how much can I avoid traffic and have a life and do that balance. And along with that is, what is it going to mean long term? Right? There's getting the work done, and I can get work done from home, but what is it going to mean to my career? What is it going to mean to my relationships? And so people are doing this weird math where they're trying to figure out the benefits of flexibility, and at the same time, what's the cost to my career, to the team, to whatever, of not being in the office all the time. And striking that balance is going to be confusing for a lot of people and for a lot of their bosses.
No, without question. And again, right now it's uncertain, right? And so we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know how it's going to be. We don't know how it's going to play out. And I think that one of the best things we can do as leaders is to understand where our folks are. Because I've been saying, there's some things that I'm saying again now that I was first saying, Wayne, in April and May of last year. And here's one that I used to say for months. I said over and over, we're all having the same experience, but experiencing it differently. So if you're in a situation where your organization just pumped the brakes and now we're going to wait 3 more months, you got some people that are ecstatic because they're going to have to go back and they didn't want to. You're going to have some people that are like, oh my gosh, I'm isolated, I want to get back. You got some people, and you got everything in between, and it might not be the same thing you're feeling. And I just talked about that at a simple level. I didn't even go to the COVID level of that, right? So one of the things, and I'm going to get to Thea put a comment here from Facebook. I want to put up here in a second. And it's good to see you, Thea. That I think that there are some things that hopefully wise, observant leaders have learned in the last year that will serve them long into the future. And one of those is being empathetic, learning to be, feeling they had to be empathetic. Go ahead. I want to get to Thea's point, but go ahead, Wayne.
Well, there's two things. One is the rise of empathy as a skill and as a necessity for leaders has never been higher, and that will always be the case. The second thing that people are telling us in classes is having to constantly be aware of their unconscious biases. And one of those biases is we lead with our eyeballs. And so it's very natural to turn to the people we physically see first, right? Whether that's in a meeting where the people on the call don't always participate fully and aren't given a chance, whether that's when it comes to delegation. You know, are we delegating to the right person or are we delegating to the nearest person?
Yes.
Right.
And we've got to be careful that we don't, you know, one of our sounding statements ever since and before we wrote the Long Distance Leader was, you got to be more intentional. And this is another example of we got to be more intentional about, we're not just doing what's easy. Like the easiest way to communicate when your team is hybrid or remote is with an email, but we know that isn't necessarily the best method in every case, right? So I want to go back to Thea's point, and I put it up here. It says, I feel like I came to a breaking point in the height of COVID, having to say I didn't have all the answers. Here's what I wanted to say. Now that is just continuing to be comfortable with that. That's the learning point, right? I learned something and grew as a leader, and now I've got to remember that lesson and keep leading from that place. And that's so true. That's just so true. Someone is chatting as me.
That's me, Kevin. It's coming, just so you know, because it's coming from this broadcast, it's all going out as you.
That's perfectly fine. But yes.
So that snarky, smart aleck response you can blame on me, not on Kevin, is the point.
It is all good. I promise. You know, we did this. So I just want to take a second and talk about sort of why we're doing this and why we're doing all this. This is the first of a series of Friday noon Eastern Time lives, and it is. I'm going to have a different guest every week. I'm glad to have Wayne here the first week. And so we just came to the conclusion, because it takes us a while, but we came to this conclusion that this conversation about the future of work, future meaning tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next 5 years, it means all of those things, is at or needs to be at the top of all of our minds. And so we're really doubling down in all of our work. And we've been talking about this for a long time, but we're really doubling down around this over the next bit. And so if we're going to, for example, we're going to do this every Friday. Next Friday, I'm going to have a gentleman named Gary Bowles with me who is writing a new book called The New World of Work, I think it's called. And so you can go to kevinikenberry.com/Friday live to get to the LinkedIn event for next week. If you're on Facebook or wherever, you're going to see again that they're coming, but you can just mark on your calendar that every Friday for about 6 weeks, we're going to be here doing this. And of course, if you're watching it later, you can always get it later. It'll be in all the same locations. But the other thing that we're doing right now is we're creating a bunch of content around this, more than normal. And you can keep up with all of that on our Future of Work newsletter, surprisingly named. And you can get signed up for that, subscribe to that newsletter by going to kevinikenberry.com/remote. All the stuff that's going on. There's a big event we haven't even announced yet that's coming in late September. But you'll find out about that there. You'll find out about more of that on these lives in the future as well. I think you may have read what I wrote this morning, Wayne, in my daily email. and if you didn't, I'm going to say it now, and then you can. I want you to respond because I know you remember this too. Yesterday, it was 40 years. Was the 40-year anniversary of the IBM PC being introduced. So first of all, do you remember that?
I do. I'm trying to remember. I got my first PC in 1987, so not an early adopter, but pretty darn close.
So, but anyway, it struck me when I read that. I do remember that when that happened and everything around it. In fact, there was a conversation on our internal Slack channel this morning about what was available on the early ones. The very earliest ones didn't even have a hard drive, everybody. That was called a PC-AT and came later. But anyway, it reminded me of something I've been saying to groups of late, and that is that in my lifetime, and I will never be quite as old as Wayne, everybody, just saying. But in my lifetime, I think there have been 3 events that have fundamentally changed work and the workplace. The first one was the introduction of the PC into the workplace. The second one was the adoption of the internet in the workplace. Both of those have happened. The third one is what's happening right now, which is the impacts of a pandemic and what happens after it and how it will change work, organizational culture, the workplace, society moving forward. And I say that because when you're in it, you don't usually notice it. You want to comment on any of that? I think I could talk about.
Well, I've got my own example that I talk about all the time, and I should probably write about this now that I think about it. My first project that I ever managed in my big boy job was rolling out email to my organization. I worked for a little mom and pop training company that was not using email, and it was my job to kind of get people on board and get them to do that. Well, as we think about the future of work and kind of unintended consequences, in that 30 years or so that since that happened, the average white-collar information worker now does over 70% of their workplace communication in writing. That has never happened in the history of humanity. That percentage of our communication is in a form which is fast and permanent and all of that stuff, but also lacks richness and is open to misinterpretation and doesn't build relationships and communicate the way that other forms do. So we are only now beginning to find a generation. I have a 28-year-old daughter. I have to convince her that telephones also transmit voice. Right? To get her to actually talk on the phone takes an act of Congress.
You know, I've had this conversation with 3 generations, with my daughter, with my wife, and with my mom. Like, they'll say, well, I talked to him today. I said, did you talk to him? Well, I texted them. Not the same thing. It's not the same. Now, there's nothing wrong with sending a text. There's nothing wrong with sending a Slack message or a Skype message or a Microsoft Teams message. There's nothing wrong with an email.
But well, anybody who remembers the before time, before email, right, when the fastest thing you had was a fax machine.
Well, think about this, everybody. Think about there are many of you that are on this call. If you're in a leadership role, that if in the role that you have now, 30, 50 years ago, 45 years ago, first of all, you weren't sending an email, which means, and so much of your written communication was actually being typed by somebody else, even at your level, not at like the CEO level.
The change when my mother was a secretary in the days when they had them, and the sea change when every executive manager, God help us, salesperson suddenly did their own communication. Right?
We had secretarial pools.
Absolutely. Admins did the communication. And here's the thing, they knew how to write and they knew how to format a letter and they knew how to do certain things. And suddenly managers could not just say, hey, send a letter to so-and-so and do something. Right. We actually had to take time out of our management job to do the communication ourselves. Physically do the communication. That changed the job forever in ways we are only now beginning to recognize.
And I think that's my big point, that we know the world of work and the workplace is changing and going to change more. And we don't know what all those implications are. Anyone who's a supposed expert that thinks they can tell you all that, well, look at any expert in any field over any length of time. And I think that we can help you think about the trend, but we don't know where it's going to end up either. Don't trust the ones that say they know. Here's the thing. What we can do now is recognize how important this time is. And we can go into it with open eyes and with a different perception and different perspective, so that we as leaders and we as individuals can be taking advantage of the opportunities that all this is going to present. That I think is a big part of what we're about in the next 5 years in our organization.
Yeah, it's funny when we talk about the future of work. There are a lot of people right now who claim to be looking at the big picture, far horizon future of work. And if you want to see the batting average of people like that, remember that over half of the companies mentioned in Built to Last no longer exist. Yeah. And it's not that Built to Last wasn't a great book, and the concepts in it are fabulous, and the author is a very smart guy. But nobody really knows. Remember, the future not only includes the big picture, tomorrow morning is the future.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you need to be prepared, kind of looking out at the horizon, of course, but also what are you going to do with what you know right now tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I think that's so right. There's we're going to start to wrap this up here in a minute, everybody. If you've got something else you want us to talk about briefly, put it in the comments, and we'll try to address it briefly. But I think the reality is that there's such an opportunity here for us, but we can't only be looking way out. We've got to be thinking about what do we do differently tomorrow and the next day. And I think I want to end where we sort of started, which was, this is freaking hard. Right?
Let's just acknowledge that, by the way.
It's hard. If I'm going to say this, it's on a PowerPoint slide in an hour and a half. Like, if you're tired, if you're exhausted, if you're frustrated, if you're stressed, you're not alone. And so is your team. And we need to acknowledge that. I had a conversation with someone who's got a brand new book yesterday, with someone who's got a brand new book came out called The Burnout Epidemic: The Rise of Chronic Stress and How We Can Fix It. You can't get it yet because it's not even out yet. She's going to join us at our upcoming event, Virtual LeaderCon. And if you don't know about Virtual LeaderCon, you should probably go take a look at that, virtualleadercon.com. But this whole point of anxiety, stress, isolation, burnout, whatever words you want to put around that, we have to pay attention to as a leader, as a human, as an individual teammate. And if we don't do that, if we try to go back to the stiff upper lip, we got this under control thing, like, it isn't serving anybody to do that. Right? It looks like you're typing, Wayne. Do you want anything else you want to say here?
No, I'm not doing a darn thing. Except Rebecca says she has cheerleader fatigue, which I would steal just to hear the look on people's faces when I say it.
Yeah, because you look like a cheerleader.
Just saying.
But that's okay. Right. And that's a statement Rebecca's making. This is a safe place. Although this seems strange to say this in social media with people from all over the world on it. This is a safe place to say that with other leaders. Some of those things you need to talk about, but you don't need to say that necessarily to your team, that particular thing to your team. Right. But you need to be able to talk about it. Right. You can I'm just saying there's some things that you need to be able to vent, and you need to be able to talk about, that while we can be honest and authentic with our team, it doesn't mean you have to tell them every last thing, right? And that might be an example of that, where you need to get some help with that. You need to think that through. You need to acknowledge it. Just saying it out loud is probably helpful in and of itself. We just have to be careful about that, right? Someone else has put something in burnout. They're saying burnout is a real thing for sure. I've experienced it myself. I think remote workers in general have a tough time being self self-propelled, good word, self-propelled and motivated and being responsible grown up. That's interesting. For everyone who says that people are having trouble with that, there are people that are the other way around, right? Saying, oh, this is so much better for people because they have so much more flexibility. Also, complacency can set in rather quickly. I think that's exactly right. Anything else you want to say about the psychology of working separately, Wayne?
Oh, good heavens. So much.
I know.
I mean, when we're talking about long-term impacts of things we haven't begun to think about yet, you know, it used to be in the before times, we got over 60% of our social interaction for the week through the workplace. HR people hold on to your hats. In the 80s, early 90s, 30% of long-term relationships began in the workplace because that's where we met people. And, you know, if you weren't dating a coworker, somebody had a sister, or you met somebody at a party or whatever it was. The long-term impacts, I'm going to give you two numbers from here in Las Vegas, which are horrifying on their own, and think about the trend. Domestic disputes. Las Vegas police answering domestic disputes in the last 6 months are up almost 30%. In the last 18 months, 25 kids in Clark County School District have taken their own lives. The long-term impact, while working from home and spending more time with your family and all of that is a fabulous benefit, we as human beings, as a society, need to adjust to how we interact, to how we form our tribes, to how we meet with new people. And this is the canary in the coal mine. This is the thing that is going to force us to address those issues.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And that goes back to what we said earlier. Not, you know, for every person who has found spending more time with their family to be awesome, there's someone for whom it's become a bigger challenge or created a new set of problems, as you just so aptly shared, Wayne. That's, I think, as good a place as any to leave this.
On that happy note, well, Wayne being Little Mary Sunshine, let's just leave that hanging there.
That way. But I think, you know, if I were to say the themes of this conversation have been the importance of empathy, the importance of recognizing that we have to recognize where our folks are and where we are, and being okay to talk about that as appropriate with the right folks. It is so very important. Some of you work in big organizations where you have things like EAP to use. And so please do that if you do. Don't feel like, oh my gosh, Kevin and Wayne, you just gave me a new role as a leader to be a psychologist. That's not your job. You're not trained to do that, most likely. I know I'm not. But I do think we can be more aware, and we can be more empathetic, and we can listen, and we can help people and help them get to where they need to be if they do need something else. There. Now you can say, now you have a chance for a final salvo, Wayne, that's better than
thanks a lot. Just that these conversations are healthy. We are in this weird time that, and you can beat this analogy to death, but it's kind of like being in the eye of the hurricane. We've had this storm beating around us, and we've been battening down the hatches and holding the shutters in and doing all this stuff and coping with it. And there's this moment of pause where we actually get a chance to consciously think, to make decisions, to begin to plan, because the next wave is coming. Right? Whether that's an extension of COVID or whether that's the chaos that's going to be with the return to the office and all of that. But we are in this absolutely unique moment where we can take stock of where we are. Think about what wasn't working so good. Because it wasn't like the before times was some Eden when nobody ever complained, right? This is a moment where we actually have a moment to think, which is something we never give ourselves voluntarily. So take this moment.
Yeah, I'll just underline that and then we'll close. and that is, we sort of opened with, oh my gosh, now we're going to wait longer to come back, and but many organizations had figured out what they were going to do. So take this moment. This may be the moment to say, man, we rushed to the finish line to go back to the office, and we wish we would have had time to do this, that, or the next thing. Well, now you have that time. You have the time to think. You have the time to plan a little bit more. You have the time to have more conversations with folks. You have the time to really do a better job of the change management, change leadership. And so take that time. I think that's a really good place for us to end. I hope that you all have enjoyed this, whether you're here live or whether you're here later. Every Friday for the next several weeks at noon Eastern time, we'll be back here. This link will always take you to the next live such situation. If you're on link, it'll take you to the LinkedIn event is what it'll do. But wherever you're watching, you can just go to that same place and join us at noon Eastern time next Friday. And next Friday it will be with a gentleman named Gary Bowles, written a brand new book. We're going to talk. We're going to have he and I are going to talk about sort of what comes to us and what comes from you along the way. We hope you'll do that. And if you want to keep up with everything that we're doing related to this whole future of work effort, you can go to kevinikenberry.com/remote to sign up for the remote work, future of work newsletter. Hope you'll do that. And I hope you'll be back with us next week. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Wayne, for the time today.
Thank you, buddy.
Friend. And April, I will see you in an hour and 20 minutes. And I'll hopefully see all of you, the rest of you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.